Lesson 15, I will find common units or number of units to compare to fractions. In Lesson 14, we figured out how we could find a common numerator or a common denominator in order to be able to compare fractions. And today we're going to continue that strategy in Lesson 15. You're going to need your math journal today, so go ahead and get it out and have it ready. Write today's date in Lesson 15, comparing fractions by finding common units. We're not going to write a whole lot in our journals, but we will write a little bit in there. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do is we are going to learn how to find common units. We're going to take a look at these two fractions. If I'm trying to compare 3/4 and 4/5, if I think about what I did in the last lesson, there's nothing I can do to 3. There's nothing I can do to this numerator 3 to get it to the numerator 4. I can't multiply it by anything to get to 4. And the same thing with the denominators. I can't multiply 4 by anything to get to 5. So that kind of puts me in a dilemma. So today I'm going to figure out what you do. I'm going to show you what to do when you can't multiply the numerators to get a number or the denominators. All right, so we're going to start with two area models. All right, I want you to draw an area model, partitioning it into 4 parts. It's very important that you use vertical lines and shade 3 out of 4 for 3/4, and that you use horizontal lines and shade 4 out of 5 to show 4/5. And you're going to see why I did it that way in just a minute. Okay, so now we're going to take each of these fours. Once you have them shaded, so you may want to pause the video and get caught up with me, but once you have drawn two area models that are just like this, now I want you to partition each fourth into 5 pieces like this. So we're going to draw 4 horizontal lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So now, instead of having 3/4, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 out of 5, 10, 15, 20. So now I have an equivalent fraction. 3/4 is equal to 15/20. Now I'm going to take these fifths and I'm going to divide them and make them, I'm going to divide each fifth into 4 parts by drawing 3 horizontal lines. So I'm going to draw one down the middle, and then I'm going to divide each one in half, just like this. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 out of 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Now look at what just happened here. Think about that for just a second. What did we just do? We just took two fractions and we created two equivalent fractions. So now I've got two fractions that have a common denominator. Now I can easily compare them. How can I compare 15/20 to 16/20? Well, 15/20 is less than 16/20. So in your journal, I want you to write this for me. I want you to write 15/20 is less than 16/20. So write this. If this is true, then this is true. 3/4 must be less than 4/5. Now let's talk about how we can show these two problems without drawing the models, because we've been using multiplication to find equivalent fractions, so we can do that too. Okay, so we started out with 3/4 and 4/5. Okay, now how can I take these and make them have a common denominator without drawing a model? I can use multiplication, right? Basically, I took the fourths and I multiplied the numerator and the denominator by 5. I took the fifths and I multiplied the numerator and the denominator by 4. See what I did there? I multiplied this fraction by 5 and I multiplied this fraction by 4. And look at what happened. I have a common denominator. We're going to be exploring that process even more in our problem set. So go ahead and get out your problem set, and we're going to draw a few area models, but we're not going to draw all area models to find this equivalent fraction. We're also going to be using some multiplication too. All right, so you're going to take a look at number 1, and it says draw an area model for each pair of fractions and use it to compare the two fractions by writing a greater than, less than, or equal to symbol on the line. The first two have been partly done for you. Each rectangle represents one whole. So let's take a look at A. They've already told us that 1/2 is less than 2/3. And you can see what they did. They took a half and they partitioned it into 3 parts to make 6s, and then they took thirds and they partitioned them in half to make 6s. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to shade these because I didn't shade these. So we started out with 1/2, and this one started out as 2/3. Okay, so then we ended up with 1/2 is the same as 3/6, and 2/3 is the same as 4/6. So 1/2 or 3/6 is actually less than 2/3 or 4/6. All right, so now let's take a look at B. So we have 4/5. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shade 4 out of 5. And I've got 3/4, so I'm going to shade 3 out of 4. Okay, so I want to take the fifths and I want to divide them into 4. So I'm going to draw 3 horizontal lines like this. So now each one of my fifths has been divided into 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I want to take my fourths and I want to turn them into fifths. So I'm going to divide them by drawing the same lines that are up here. I'm going to draw 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I took each fourth and I divided it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts. So I had 4/5, and I took 4 and 5 and I multiplied them by 4, which gives me 16/20. I know that's kind of squished. All right, and then over here, I'm going to write this one over here. I had 3/4, and I took the numerator and the denominator, and I multiplied them by 5. I divided them into 5 parts, and that gave me 15/20. So now I have common denominators. 4/5 is the same thing as 16/20, and 3/4 is the same as 15/20. Well, because 16 is more than 15, then that means that 16/20 is greater than 15/20. So 4/5 is greater than 3/4. Okay? All right, let's take a look at C. All right, so we're going to draw our model. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make these into fifths like this. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is why I usually use the cheat tool because they look so messy. All right, now I'm going to divide these into 7 parts. I'm going to draw 6 lines, okay? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so let's shade. I'm going to shade 3/5, and I'm going to shade 4/7. All right, now, so I'm going to take my fifths and I'm going to divide them into 7 parts. So I'm going to draw 6 vertical lines. 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to divide my sevenths into fifths by drawing horizontal lines. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 21 35ths. And here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 25 35ths. Now let's see how we can get here just using multiplication. I can take 3/5 and I can take 4/7. I take the fifths and multiply them by 7. And I take the sevenths and I multiply them by 5. And look at what I get. Oops, that should be a 7. And now I have a common denominator. They both have a denominator of 35. So I can see that 21 35ths is actually less than 25 35ths. So 3/5 is less than 4/7. Okay, for these last three, we're not going to draw the model. We're just going to use the multiplication. So I've got 3/7 and I've got 2/6. Okay, now I could, well, there's nothing I can do to 3 to get to 2 and nothing I can do to 7 to get to 6. So let's talk about what we've been doing here. We've been taking the sevenths and multiplying them by 6. And then I'm going to take the sixes and I'm going to multiply them by 7. Notice how I'm multiplying the numerator and the denominator by the same number. You have to have an equivalent fraction. So now I have 18 42nds and 14 42nds. Well, 18 is greater than 14. So 3/7 is greater than 2/6. All right, let's take a look at 5/8 and 6/9. So I have 5/8 and 6/9. So I'm going to take the eighths and I'm going to multiply them by 9. And I'm going to take the ninths and I'm going to multiply them by 8. So now I have 45 72nds, sounds funny, and 48 72nds. Well, 45 is less than 48. Therefore, 5/8 is less than 6/9. All right, last one. I have 2/3 and 3/4. I'm going to take my thirds and multiply them by 4. And I'm going to take my fourths and I'm going to multiply them by 3. Now I have a common denominator. I have 8/12 and 9/12. Well, 8 is less than 9. So 8/12 is less than 9/12. So 2/3 is less than 3/4. Okay? We're pretty much going to do the exact same thing on the back as we did on the front. I'd like for you to try to do one of these by yourself. See if you can figure out how to use multiplication to compare these two fractions. If you're a little bit nervous about doing this one by yourself, you can do it with me. Or if you feel pretty confident, go ahead and pause the video and try to do it by yourself. All right, so we're going to take 3/5 and I'm going to multiply my fifths by 6. And I'm going to take my sixes and I'm going to multiply those times 5. That gives me 18 30ths and 25 30ths. So 18 is less than 25. So 3/5 is less than 5/6. All right, let's try B. Again, if you think you can do this one all by yourself, go for it. All right, so I've got 2 6s and 3/8. I'm going to take my 6s and multiply them by 8. I'm going to take my 8s and multiply them by 6. And now I have a common denominator. I have 16 48ths and 18 48ths. So because 16 is less than 18, 2 6s are less than 3/8. All right, now we have 7/5 and 10/8. So I have fifths and eighths. See if you can't try to finish this one all by yourself. Pause the video and do as much of it as you can by yourself, and then come back and let's compare. Okay, so I'm going to take my sevenths, or excuse me, my fifths and multiply them by 8. And I'm going to take my eighths and multiply them by 5. And that gives me 56 40ths and 50 40ths. Well, because 56 is greater than 50, then 56 40ths is greater than 50 40ths. So 7/5 is greater than 10/8. Okay, so I would really like for you to try D all by yourself. Pause the video, see what you can do, and then come back. Okay, so hopefully you tried to do this one all by yourself. And hopefully you took the thirds and multiplied them by 5. And hopefully you took your fifths and multiplied them times 3. So now you'll have a common denominator of 20/15 and 18/15. So since they're both 15ths, I can just compare the numerators. Since 20/15 has a larger numerator than 18/15, 20/15 is a larger fraction. So 4/3 is larger than 6/5. Now it says use any method to compare the fractions. Record your answer using greater than, less than, or equal to. So that means we don't necessarily have to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number. Let's take a look. We can use any method. So if you take a look at A, I'm looking at my numerators, and I have 3 and 7. There's nothing I can do to 3 to get to 7. And I'm looking at my denominators. I have 4 and 8. There is something I can do to 4 to get to 8. So let's go ahead and write this over here. So instead of multiplying my 4s times 8 and my 8s times 4s, I don't have to do anything to my 8s. I can just multiply 3/4 times 2, and now I have 6/8. So now I have a common denominator. I have 6/8 and 7/8. Well, 6 is less than 7, so therefore 3/4 is less than 7/8. It would not have been wrong if you had used the same strategy that we used in the last problem. I want to show you what would happen. You may have already did this one by yourself, but if you had used the same strategy and you had multiplied your 4s times 8 and you had multiplied your 8s times 4, this is just like what we were doing before. You would have 24 30-seconds and 28 30-seconds. Well, 24 is less than 28. You still would have got the less than sign. The only difference is you would have done this extra step that I didn't have to do. So there's nothing wrong with doing it this way. It's just a little bit more work. All right, so let's take a look at B. All right, so I've got 6 and 3 for numerators, and I've got 8 and 5 as denominators. Choose a strategy other than guessing to solve this problem, and then come back. If you can't figure out what to do, you can do it with me. All right, so I'm looking at 6 and I'm looking at 3 and I'm thinking, well, I can multiply 3 times 2 and that'll get me 6. So look at what happens if I do this. I can take my 3/5 and multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2, because remember, you always have to multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number. And that gives me 6/10. So now if I have 6/10 here, so let's pretend this is 6/10. Well, 8ths are larger than 10ths, because remember, the more parts you divide it into, the smaller your parts. So if I have 6/8, I have more than if I have 6/10. So 6/8 is greater than 3/5. Again, if you used this strategy to solve this problem, you would still get the same answer. You would just have one extra step. So there's nothing I can do to 6 to get to 8, and there's nothing I can do to 4 to get to 6. So I'm going to use that same strategy that we learned today. I'm going to take my 4s, and I'm going to multiply them times 6. And I'm going to take my 6s, and I'm going to multiply them times 4. And then I will have a common denominator. So now I have 36 24ths, and I have 32 24ths. So because 36 is greater than 32, that means 6/4 is greater than 8/6. All right, so let's take a look at D. Again, there's nothing I can do to get from 8 to 9, and there's nothing I can do to 5 to get to 6. So I will have to find a common denominator by taking my 8/5 and my 9/6 and multiplying my 5ths times 6 and multiply my 6s times 5. And then that will give me 48 30ths and 45 30ths. So now I have a common denominator because 48 is greater than 45, 8/5 is greater than 9/6. Now let's take a look at number 4. Explain 2 ways you have learned to compare fractions. Prove evidence using words, pictures, and numbers. Okay, so today we have learned 2 different ways to compare fractions. The first thing we learned is that we can use an area model and we can find common units and then compare the number of units. So let's go ahead and say that. Okay, I'm going to type because I can type faster than I can write. I can draw 2 area models and find common units, then compare the number of units in each model. Okay, that was one way. Okay, I can also find common units by using multiplication and comparing the 2 fractions. Okay, so now we have to let's use a real quick model here. So let's say we're comparing 2/3. Let's use an easy one so we don't have to work too hard. The smaller the numbers, the easiest will be. So let's say we wanted to compare 2/3 to 3/4. Okay, so let's take our little model here and let's divide this into thirds. And let's shade 2. And then let's take this one and divide this one into fourths horizontally. And we have to shade 3. Okay, so we have to take the thirds and make them into fourths. And we have to take the fourths and make them into thirds like this. This model is kind of hard to read. All right, so I've got 8 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 over here. And here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 12 here. So 8/12 is less than 9/12. I can also use multiplication to do the exact same process. So I'm going to take my thirds and I'm going to multiply them by 4. And I'm going to take my fourths and I'm going to multiply them by 3. And now I have 8/12 and 9/12. Okay, so this is 2 different ways. This way you draw a model and can just count the number of parts that's shaded, or here you can use multiplication. So these are the same 2 ways that we learned today. I find the multiplication to be more effective and to be less time consuming. The model is much easier done on paper than it is on this computer, but it also works. You have to decide which one you like the best. So when you get ready to find your exit slip today, I want you to come back and look at your strategies and your problem set and see if you can do it all by yourself.